Chapter 13. Jim Garfield, Ray, and David Hunter Duncan at work. Jim Garfield watched the news channels while he performed his morning exercises. First the treadmill, then the stationary bike, and finally the Nordic ski machine. After about an hour into his aerobics, his business partner Ray called him and invited him to his house. There they lifted weights for 3 hours. At the conclusion of the weightlifting, Jim Garfield and Ray ate steak dinners prepared by Ray's wife, Mary Ann. From there, Jim Garfield drove his Impala through the streets of Houston as he listened to The Greatest Generals in History on audiobook. He routinely spent hundreds and even thousands of dollars a day on lottery tickets and high-end scratch tickets. His best prize to date was a $1.8 million Texas lottery jackpot, which he gave to David Hunter Duncan, no strings attached. David Hunter Duncan had owed him $37,000 at the time of the drawing. After receiving 16 monthly payments from the Texas Lottery Commission, David Hunter Duncan somehow owed Jim Garfield $47,000. Jim Garfield had not been entirely altruistic in giving away the winning ticket. He wanted a payout of at least $10 million for himself, and he thought it might arouse suspicion if he had personally hit multiple winners. When the Texas lottery jackpot was low, he bought more instant million tickets and fewer lottery tickets. He had only purchased one lottery ticket during that memorable week, but it turned out to be a winner. Jim Garfield had launched a plan to set up Mary Ann as a convenience store owner. Not having a criminal record, she would be eligible to sell beer and, more important, lottery tickets. Then they would be able to work $50 to $100 an hour into the system, and Jim Garfield would only spend 2 to 3 hours a day buying tickets. But neither Ray nor Mary Ann read very well, and routine paperwork tripped them up. Jim Garfield had hired a lawyer to help them, but now there was a problem securing a loan with Ray's understated income. Next small winner would be given to Ray. At the end of 8 hours of driving and eating and buying tickets, Jim Garfield settled into his 2-bedroom apartment at Rego Estates. He paid mortgages for 3 women, but Jim Garfield still did not own a house. That might come after a lottery win. In the meantime, he conducted his business at 317 Rego Estates. 317 Rego Estates was austere, at least by Jim Garfield standards. There were pictures of Jim Garfield's deceased mother and his 2 kids, Laura Lee Vinson and Franz Wilhelm Jones, on the wall. He didn't have a panorama, but each room had a large screen TV mounted on the wall. There was comfy furniture and a few souvenirs here and there, a Harley-Davidson emblem, a Ferrari Stallion, 2 posters of the BMW motorcycles he owned, and an autographed photo of a lovely porn star that had been purloined by an acquaintance in a burglary. Coincidentally, it had been signed, "I love you, Jim, Angel Blue." In each closet were packed suitcases with several days of clothing, money, fake ID, and toiletries. In all, there were 2 packed suitcases for him and 2 for Ray, and 1 for David Hunter Duncan. The closet in the bedroom concealed a safe that held dozens of pieces of false identification that the trio might need someday. Memory sticks and hard drives were meticulously arranged under clothing in every drawer. There were several portable computers here and there, and in the smaller bedroom there perched a pyramid of cell phones and cradles that Jim Garfield always covered with a sheet when he left. The security system was partly his design. He had mounted crypto cams to monitor the only entrance, and they fed into a processor that would notify him immediately on several cells if security had been breached. Around 10 p.m., Ray appeared and gave Jim Garfield an accounting of his dispatches. Most people would consider Ray to be kind of slow, but he had the best memory Jim Garfield had ever observed. In prison, he and Ray had played a series of memory games. read books on memory, and even took a class called Memory Improvement that no one seemed to know the who, what, or why of its funding. Both men being stock car fans, Ray would assign each of his couriers the name of a past or present driver. He would then say something like, Richard Petty will run a smart race for 300 miles in Sacramento. As he listened, Jim Garfield would hastily sketch a 43 car with cryptic messages on the side that resembled corporate logos. At the completion of Ray's report, Jim Garfield would have a silly-looking drawing of a dozen or so racing legends that he would later scan into a computer. Tonight, Ray also supplied the routing numbers and account numbers of a half dozen new bank accounts in Durham, North Carolina. Jim Garfield once more marveled at his friend's memory. At 11 p.m., David Hunter Duncan rolled in, and Ray drifted off to the smaller bedroom to watch TV. Jim Garfield had once respected David Hunter Duncan as a criminal luminary. He was streetwise, he was prison-wise, he was crime-wise. But it was becoming more and more apparent to Jim Garfield that he could also be a dumbass. He could not always recall what transactions or commands he had made. There was never a report that did not have at least one detail wrong. And David Hunter Duncan did not practice universal precautions, but would say things like, I told that Dallas fucker 1 pound sharp was 7,500. Jim Garfield would once more be frustrated with his report, but with some effort he was able to sort out the details. Around midnight, the trio assembled in the living room. Ray and David Hunter Duncan each drank a beer, and Jim Garfield sipped a Sprite. The TV turned its focus to yesterday's chemical attack. You never hurt a kid, David Hunter Duncan snarled. Never, Ray bellowed. If I ran into those cocksuckers, I'd cut their fucking marbles off, David Hunter Duncan growled, and stuff their tiny little peetees down their cocksucking throats, Ray added. Whoa, cage fighting is on, Jim Garfield announced before changing to the channel. Luckily, a fight was in progress and his guests took notice. Jim Garfield leaned back in his recliner and tried to breathe deeply. Despite his efforts at relaxation, he felt perspiration on every part of his body and hoped his guest would not notice. He killed a Sprite and then pounded into the kitchen and swallowed another can almost before the refrigerator door closed. Jim Garfield studied his now engrossed company from the kitchen and tried again to make his diaphragm move. He steadied himself against a chair and then stumbled back to the refrigerator. Opening the freezer door, he stuck his head inside until at last he was refreshed. With his heart still booming, he wandered back to the living room and watched the fights in silence. He had never before known such fear. He didn't even know that this kind of fear was possible. Joe Fungo had masterminded the chemical attack, and besides Mary Elizabeth Jones, whom he might have to deal with at a later time, Fungo was the only link to Jim Garfield. Joe Fungo had to go. He had to go. Jim Garfield used his cell to read a weather forecast. Clear skies the next 3 days. If all went well, Fungo might be gone tomorrow night. Jim Garfield forced himself to grin.